nature, water, grass. And dialog boxes so shiny, so juicy, you almost wanted to lick them. It wasn't just design, it was a philosophy of calming people who were just learning how to interact with technology. That was exactly the kind of concept of technology being sold to us everywhere in the mid-2000s. At a newly opened dental office, at some trade fair, or finally in computers, tablets, and the first smartphones. After all, these new mini-computers that more and more people carried in their pockets were, at first, an incredibly futuristic and unnatural idea. Like you're clicking something, but you're not actually clicking anything because you're just touching a piece of glass. So their systems had to be designed to strongly remind us of the surrounding world, so that under no circumstances would we get scared and go, wow, technology. Just water, nature, wood, fabric, Netflix and chill. Welcome to the future we were promised but never got. Enjoy the video. Frutiger Aero. It's a visual style that evolved throughout the 2000s. Back in its heyday, it didn't have an official name. That's why people refer to it in different ways. But the most popular term comes from two sources. The Frutiger typeface, created by Adrian Frutiger, which often appeared in many examples of this iconic design, and Windows Aero, the graphical interface used in Windows Vista and Windows 7. But where did it come from? Why did it happen? And why did it suddenly disappear as if overnight? Just like with many other innovations and inventions in our world, this story too begins with a war. But not a traditional war between two countries, rather a war between two long-standing technological rivals. In 2001, Windows XP was released, a system packed with all sorts of neat features designed with the growing importance of the internet in mind. It was also the first truly mainstream Microsoft operating system that didn't look like a bunch of dull grey boxes and pixelated text. At last, computers were powerful enough to show users something more without slowing everything down in the process. Windows now had blue-tinted windows, glossy buttons, and soft shadows. Aesthetics were finally starting to matter. At the same time, Microsoft's main competitor, Apple, was shifting into a higher gear. In that same year, 2001, Steve Jobs introduced the world to Apple's new computer operating system, macOS X. macOS X. This system not only included a range of new internet-focused features, much like Windows XP did, but also came with a striking, distinctive and bold visual style. A design language Apple called Aqua, named after its inspiration, water and glass. As Jobs himself put it, the goal was to make buttons look so beautiful and shiny that you'd want to lick them. And it's fair to say they succeeded. That design language became iconic for years and served as the visual foundation of Apple's identity for over a decade. Although it took Microsoft a good few years to catch up to Apple in terms of aesthetics, Windows eventually got its own glassy makeover. In 2006, after much anticipation, Windows Vista hit the market, packed with new features and introducing a fresh design language called Aero Glass. Windows now had translucent glossy windows and the entire interface was filled with frosted glass effects. However, Vista came with some serious flaws that earned it a reputation as one of the most disliked operating systems in history. It was heavily redesigned, which meant poor compatibility with older hardware, and it launched with a slew of technical issues. Part of the problem was that the new, effect-heavy interface was simply too demanding for many computers at the time, so users had to wait a bit longer for a more polished version of Microsoft's Aero aesthetic, until 2009 when Windows 7 was released. And that's exactly the system most of us remember as the absolute peak of that era, even though it arrived just as the Frutiger Aero aesthetic was starting to fade away. In the meantime, however, Microsoft was also working on the Xbox 360, something that's easy to forget, and that console too was full of little Frutiger Aero era details, blue skies and green grass backgrounds or other abstract futuristic spaces. This dominant visual language wasn't limited to Microsoft, of course. Many other consoles embraced similar design cues, including PlayStation and perhaps most iconically Nintendo Wii. The Wii didn't just reflect the visual side of the trend, it also complemented it with a distinctive musical and sound design layer, which has since become something of a nostalgic soundtrack to the Frutiger Aero aesthetic that's now trending again in TikTok edits and screenshots. Exactly, because when it comes to sound, Frutiger Aero had a very distinctive one too. Take for example the sounds of Windows Vista and Windows 7. All those gentle chimes and soft tones that felt like a light tap on the shoulder, reminding you that you did something wrong, or whispering that everything's fine now. Shh, it's okay. You could even stretch the idea a bit and include certain pieces of music that became the unofficial, informal soundtrack of this aesthetic, or more precisely of its TikTok revival. Tracks like Ilya by In Love with a Ghost, Lease by Takeshi Abo, or the Meme Maker music from the Nintendo Wii U when you're customizing your meme, all perfectly capture that nostalgic, softly futuristic vibe of the Frutiger Aero era. Frutiger Aero was also a symbol of its time, an expression of a certain technological optimism. Technology, we were told, wasn't going to overwhelm us, it was going to help us. We would live in harmony with it. Just look at those modern glass and metal cities, intertwined with bright green grass and trees, where a little stream flows peacefully and something falls into it, and you think, yeah, I'd drink that at 4 AM. It was a kind of eco-futurism, an aesthetic of progress and trust in technology. Everything felt fresh, seamlessly connected with nature. Even if that nature was made of pixels on a screen, it was there. Water and the omnipresent blue stood for life, purity and renewal. Transparency and glass symbolized openness, honesty and the absence of secrets or tricks. Light and reflections embodied the spirituality of technology. Leaves and the sky, harmony with nature. And so this style often was spilled from our screens into the real world. Frutiger Aero became a blueprint for what modernity was supposed to look like. Glass office buildings, transparent furniture, blue and green LED lights. Homelessness? What homelessness? We were all supposed to be here in this bright, clean green and blue paradise. When it came to devices, Apple once again captured that vision best. Computers looked like semi-transparent blocks, as if a bag had been frozen inside amber, an era obsessed with clear and translucent plastics. But beyond hardware, if you were lucky, you could also experience Frutiger Aero in real life, in the interiors of various offices, clinics or telecom company branches. Spaces that indeed looked like renderings. Photo wallpapers of fish and water covering up everyday dullness, white and chrome furniture polished to a blinding shine, and because Frutiger Aero stood for cleanliness and modernity, advertising couldn't get enough of it either. Countless ads, especially those promoting hygiene, freshness or technology, borrowed its glossy Utopian aesthetic. What truly tied together Aqua and Aero, these two distinct yet strikingly similar design languages, wasn't just these glossy fireworks, the omnipresent glass, or other shimmering reflections. It was also skeuomorphism, because skeuomorphism is an inseparable part of the Frutiger Aero aesthetic. In short, skeuomorphism is all about imitating real life in the digital world. And while the shiny, light-reflecting surfaces were already skeuomorphic to some extent, designers of that era really took it to another level. In Windows Vista and Windows 7, your desktop could be filled with all kinds of widgets, clocks, calendars, weather panels, and other gadgets, each one modeled after some real-world object. In macOS, the QuickTime player looked like an actual physical media player you'd find under someone's TV set, complete with the signature brushed aluminum finish. The DVD player app in macOS resembled a portable Walkman or something of this sort, again made of that shiny metal. The design of that time was bold. Everything was created with one goal in mind: to make technology feel familiar and friendly to users who were only just getting comfortable with computers, unlike the early adopters of the 90s who still thought having text and numbers appear on the screen was the height side of innovation. And skeuomorphism became especially important when phones turned into computers. Suddenly, everyone could handle most of their daily and especially internet tasks literally at arm's reach, wherever they happened to be. This newfound accessibility demanded a deeper understanding of the user. And those users were still getting used to touchscreens, to what these ultra-thin little machines could actually do, and what they'd soon become capable of as the years went on. That's exactly why at the dawn of the smartphone era, skeuomorphism became the dominant design language. While Apple had always been a champion of visually rich, realistic interfaces, the rising Android ecosystem also drew heavily from the skeuomorphic and Aero-inspired aesthetic that were everywhere at the time. But it was Apple's iOS that truly defined skeuomorphism. The calendar app had stitched leather textures, notes looked like a yellow legal pad completed with notebook lines, and the Game Center app spread a field of green billiard felt across the entire screen. In iBooks, your digital ebooks sat neatly on a wooden bookshelf. And there were so many more little touches like that, not even just in iOS. The attention to detail, the craftsmanship, the sheer polish of those designs seemed limitless. But all good things come to an end. And so around 2011 and 2012, tech companies began to distance themselves more and more from the Aqua Aero aesthetic. And it's really hard to pinpoint exactly why this happened. If I had to guess though, it was probably an attempt to refresh themselves in the consumer's eyes. And also people didn't need those skeuomorphic gadgets anymore to fully understand how to use a given device. There's also another way to look at it. Frutiger Aero just seems like a really cheap and harmless way of so-called eco-washing, a way for corporations to appear clean, natural and optimistic, even while at the same time they were doing just bad stuff behind the scenes. And after that initial wave of techno-optimism, people began to wake up. They realized that technology wasn't going to save us. It wasn't some magic solutions to all of the world's problems. In fact, it turned out it could really harm us in some ways. And this particular shift was enforced by numerous scandals and different controversies, showing us all just how easily governments could spy on us if they wanted to. And as it turned out, they often really wanted to spy on us. And after that, it was probably just pressure and a domino effect. More and more tech companies were embracing minimalism, and everything that didn't fit the new trend quickly started to look outdated. Microsoft, meanwhile, was trying its luck in the smartphone market. In 2010, they introduced Windows Phone 7, which, despite coming out a year after the desktop Windows 7, actually had far more in common with Windows 8, released in 2012. And that Windows 8, well, it's earned its place as Microsoft's second most hated operating system right after Vista. That's exactly the one where they replaced the iconic start button with whatever that was. A screen full of flat tiles and panels. They were trying to turn laptops into tablets and tablets into computers, but yeah, that didn't age too well. Everything was flattened, simplified and enlarged, optimized for touchscreens, but stripped of all its detail. Worse still, there were inconsistent leftovers from previous systems scattered all over the place. The new design was harsh, blocky and bold, but above all, it was incoherent. On one side you had the new start screen with colorful tiles and tablet-style apps, on the other the same old Windows underneath, with classic functions and icons that still looked straight out of Vista, XP or even Windows 95. Eventually even Apple went through major changes on its own, most likely accelerated by the death of Steve Jobs. Around that time, Scott Forstall, Jobs' close friend and the man who had long been in charge of Apple's software, started to lose influence. Design control, both in hardware and software, shifted fully into the hands of Johnny Ive. And while Apple owes Ive a lot for shaping its iconic hardware look, once he took charge of the software visual design, he went all in and redesigned everything. That's exactly how iOS 7 was born, Apple's first flat operating system. iPhone users woke up after after the update as if they had been transported into a completely different, unfamiliar reality. There were still some hints of texture and detail in the icons and menus, but nothing close to the lush, tactile richness of earlier iOS versions. Soon after the flat iPhone update came the desktop counterpart, OS X Yosemite. Meanwhile, Android was also getting flat, introducing its own design philosophy, Material Design 1. It technically had depth and textures, or at least the idea of them, but in practice everything was distinctly flat. Of course, this keeps a lot of nuance. Many manufacturers used their own Android skins that changed the look of the system completely. But over time, those too became flatter and flatter. And just like that, Frutiger Aero, Skeuomorphism, and the art of detail and realism in interface design all died out. And that was it, right? You see, the thing is that over the past few years, we've been experiencing a kind of renaissance in interface design and digital aesthetics in general. It's not and will probably never be a full return to Frutiger Aero, but nevertheless, people had been fed up with flat design for years. That's how neomorphism or neomorphic design emerged, a spiritual successor to skeuomorphism. It's an attempt to reconcile realism with the simplicity and cleanliness that dominated during the flat era. Light and shadow play a key role here, making interface elements appear embossed or extruded from the background. And this neomorphism, much like Frutiger Aero before it, has a real fondness for frosted glass effects, soft blurs, and it sometimes even flirts with 3D elements and models. These changes are also driven by the rapid development of virtual reality devices, where once again designers have to help people adapt to a new form of technology. This time, it's often technology that's embedded in our physical world, like mixed reality glasses. But regardless of the medium, one trend is clear: more detail, the return of glass, and translucent menus. And this isn't just a trend anymore, it's becoming a reality. That's how glassomorphism was born. Think of it as Aero after detox. Clean, minimalist, yet still shiny and light-filled. Apple fully embraced this style, and in 2025 they introduced liquid glass, a simulated glass aesthetic across their systems. Sure, Apple didn't invent anything new, they just remembered that glass always looks good. But it's not just about funny little buttons that look like they're about to melt and slide off your screen. It's about semi-transparent, blurred backgrounds, those aqualight highlights and reflections, and a playful sense of depth and texture. Some say this drastic visual shift was meant to distract audiences from the failure of their Apple Intelligence project, which turned out to be a bit of a flop. But honestly, it's part of a broader global trend. Microsoft is doing something similar with its Fluent Design 2 and its so-called acrylic materials, a design language full of 3D icons, soft lighting effects, and glassy textures that are gradually but steadily spreading across Windows 11. They even made a commercial for the terminal, for crying out loud. And as always, when the tech giants move, the rest follow. Even YouTube's new video player now features a blurred, glowing background echoing the same modern glassy aesthetic. There are of course countless examples of this shift, and I'm sure you guys can think of plenty yourself. So please go ahead and share them in the comments below. When people talk about Frutiger Aero, they often mention other related aesthetics, similar in spirit but subtly different in style. It might sound like nitpicking, but it's actually really fascinating. Just before Frutiger Aero, right at the turn of the 90s and the new millennium, there was the year 2K aesthetic. Chrome, plastic, glass and metallic shine. Lots of color and tons of little gadgets, doodads and decorative clutter everywhere. 3D typography, futuristic logos and those glossy dialog windows straight out of late 90s and early 2000s games. We're modern now, so everything had antennas and cables sticking out of it. Bright pinks, bold gradients and glitter. So much glitter. The transitional phase between year 2K and Frutiger Aero is often called Helvetica Aqua Aero or Aquacore. It's closer to Frutiger Aero in spirit, but distinctly wetter. Think fish, waves, turquoise tones and sparkles. Like the aquarium-themed mousepad your aunt had, or a soap dish with little rubber ducks floating on it. There was also a transitional period between Frutiger Aero and flat design. That's when a style sometimes called Metro Aero or Frutiger Metro started to emerge. It essentially flattened out some of the detail from Frutiger Aero, but without stripping away its personality. its detail. Everything looked a bit cleaner and simpler, yet still rich in texture and flair. Modernity was now meant to feel sleeker, faster and more transparent. You can spot this look in all kinds of visuals from that era, from basic iPod ads to those iconic ones with silhouetted dancers, often yes, the dancing Asian girls era of advertising. The term Metro from its name might be linked to Microsoft's internal code name for its flat design language, Metro, which referred to the tile-based interface used in Windows Phone and Windows 8. However, due to legal issues, reportedly trademark disputes, Microsoft had to drop the name and told developers to use the much duller term Modern UI instead. And you'll never guess who ended up worshipping Frutiger Aero and even built a whole community around it. Us. I mean Gen Z, and I know that I might look like I'm between 12 and 42 years old, but trust me, I'm the so-called Zoomer, okay? Frutiger Aero has been trending on TikTok for quite a few years now. Honestly, I get the nostalgia. Frutiger Aero was something special, and then almost overnight it was gone, replaced by a flat, sterile and, let's be real, much duller digital world. Styles fade and return, that's how it always goes. So who knows, maybe Frutiger Aero will make a full comeback someday. Some of its traits are already creeping back in, and maybe, just maybe, we'll see it again in all its glory. And that's all from me for today. Take care out there on the internet. Thank you for watching.